Okay, so to remind you where we are, we're talking about this painting from the Asian Museum, Fisherman's Joy, Anonymous, and we are looking at it within different kinds of patronage contexts that may have existed. Since it's anonymous, we don't have a specific date, there's no way we can tie down that patronage context for sure, but we can suggest a number of different options. Okay, so that's what we're doing, looking at it regionally. And we've been looking at it in the South here among painters in the literati style, some of whom were professional artists painting for the open commercial market, would have their wares on the wall or would receive gifts of silk or money or other kinds of things and then paint for them. And Sheng Mo, this is a painting in your collection, a very fine painting in your collection here, is emblematic of that kind of painting. Wu Zhen, on the other hand, had no commercial success there. They were neighbors, and there's an apocryphal story that people always came with gifts for Sheng Mo, but nobody knocked at Wu Zhen's door, and his wife complained all of the time and said, you should do something a little flashier, not so simple. And you know, now he's seen as one of the 4 great masters of the Yuan, and he's noted for that kind of clumsy personal style. He did, fortunately for us, he did not do that, so we have this simple style still. Okay, so another one of these southern masters, Ni Zan. For all we know, he's one of the 4 greats of the Yuan. For all we know, he was never paid for a work of art, but he did dedicate and rededicate paintings. Okay, so this one, which is in the National Palace Museum, again, that same composition that we just saw, but in his inimitable style, a very dry, reserved style. That was typical, with a lot of horizontal marks and completely empty, the pavilion with no person in it. He painted this, and it was, fell into the hands of somebody named Old Man Bo Xuan. Whether or not this is the first person that he painted it for, or whether it had changed hands a few times, we don't know, but it was originally dated 1372, and then he adds a long inscription here, and I give part of it to you, in which he says on April 16th, 1374, Old Man Bo Xuan brought over this painting and asked me to inscribe a poem on it. So Ni Zan is at home. This man brings a painting that's now owned by him, by Ni Zan, and says, I'm going to use this as a gift, okay? He says he wanted to present it to the physician Ren Zhong of Xishan, which is also my hometown, and the doctor's studio is called the Rongxi Studio. So he retitles the work, gives it a new title, calls it the Rongxi Studio, and the doctor's, so I'll return to my hometown, visit the studio, drink some wine with the doctor, and unroll this painting to celebrate his longevity. Then I will have fulfilled my wishes, okay? So he knows Bo Xuan's gonna take this, present it to the physician for what we don't know, as a memento of friendship, for services. Maybe this Bo Xuan, Old Man Bo Xuan, needs some medicine or needs some treatment, okay? And he's going to take it over there and give it to him. And so Ni Zan willingly re-inscribes it, rededicates it to this person. So whether or not there was, you know, money involved in this, it certainly shows that Ni Zan and I imagine all painters of this period were quite aware that their works had a certain kind of, they were being used in barter, essentially, okay? Being given. And so I wouldn't say that this, just because there's not hard cash on the table, that means that there wasn't patronage going on, okay? That there is a kind of recognition of paintings as, I don't know the right word, but they had value, okay? They had a certain kind of role to play in social negotiation. So is this painting in that realm? Quite possibly. Painted by someone as a gift in a social situation, and then went out into the world. It could be that, especially if it was painted in the south. In the north, so we imagine this painter maybe something like Wu Zhen or something. I should point out that it's on silk, and it's very large. So if it was painted as a gift, it was a very nice gift. Paintings on silk are especially valuable, okay, because silk is valuable. Okay, so another patronage context that we might think about it in is in the north. A number of painters from the south, as well as painters in the north, but painters from the south, two of them, Zhu Derun and Tang Di, both from Hangzhou, went to Beijing. They were they had some bureaucratic positions, but they were commissioned by members of the imperial family to do wall paintings in their residences and in temples. We don't have any of those still around, but I bring you two paintings. Zhu Derun in particular he was a friend of Zhao Mengfu, a younger disciple. And he was particularly beloved by one of the Mongol princes who had tons of his paintings and gave them as a gift to a Korean prince who took them back. So there was a huge, I just talked to your Korean arts curator, and she said, you know, there's a huge impact of the Mongols in Korea, and even including this transmission of Chinese-style painting into Korea during this period is partially because of this wedding gift of Chinese scrolls that was given to a Korean prince at this time, including Zhu Derun. And if you know Korean painting, you kind of recognize this. There's repetition of that. Okay, so perhaps this painting was done in the north by a southerner, or maybe by a northerner, maybe as a presentation piece for a large hall, something of that sort, okay? Because we do know that these men who are generally considered literati painters were also put to work in wall painting and large-scale painting to decorate northern palaces. And if you think of the Mongol imperial family who is commissioning these artists of great literati, scholarly background to do these paintings, you also get a sense that the Mongols were interested in this broad range of visual culture that existed within their realm, and that they themselves wanted it in their places as part of this expression of their cosmopolitanism, of their bringing all of their domain under their purview. And as more of them were educated in the Confucian classics, they began to identify with the kinds of virtues, the tall pine tree standing proud as emblem of a loyal official, these kinds of things going on. And this is playing zithers, but notice here, this is a fisherman, and here's a fisherman. So to locate the fisherman as a theme that's only happening in the South, I think, is also somewhat problematic. In fact, in keeping with this Mongol interest in Chinese culture, one of the questions I received during the break was about what the Mongols did with the art in their conquered territories. And I don't know that much about their conquered territories in Central Asia and further west, but I do know that in China, when they got to Hangzhou, they came to the city gates, and the empress who was reigning as a regent sacrificed. And so Hangzhou was mainly left intact, was not destroyed. And one of the first things that the army did, they were ordered not to ransack the place, and in fact to go into the palace and confiscate and put under quarantine the Song imperial collection. So they were aware, even the military men, of the symbolic value of this vast collection of the Chinese empire. And you all know it still has a very strong role to play in the Taiwan mainland. The imperial collection split between those two places, right? And both making a very large presentation of the imperial collection as has a partially political overtone. Okay, so they confiscated and then had a whole inventory done, and then had it sent to Dadu under lock and key, and it was all taken into the imperial collection in Dadu, okay? So in fact, things that were in private collections may have been destroyed, but things that were, burned up in, smaller places that were overrun that didn't defect to the Mongols. So here we see a piece that is by a Song Dynasty, Northern Song Dynasty painter Zhao Gan, and it has a large imperial seal of the Yuan Dynasty Emperor Wenzong, who reigned. His Tug Timuri reigned between 1228 and 1232. He loved Chinese painting. He had a large a library called the Kuizhangge. It was his private library where he had meetings with his scholars, and they would come and appreciate paintings together, among other things that they did there. They did lots of other things there, but one of the things they did in their leisure time was to appreciate some of the ancient Chinese paintings in their collection, and a number of these have survived with those imperial seals appended, and then also inscriptions. So one of the articles I wrote was about how Wenzong and his mostly Chinese officials were using these paintings as a kind of symbol of political legitimacy within. So this inscription actually doesn't give an interpretation. Some of the inscriptions actually do give us interpretations of what they were trying to basically teach. This library was set up as a kind of teaching headquarters. Okay, so what were these Chinese scholars teaching the emperor? But in this case, it's just the names of the people who were present when it was brought out and showed to the Mongol emperor. But it's a southern Chinese landscape of fishermen, and we can assume that it was it's early spring. There's snow falling. Some people may have seen this. Occasionally you can get to see this in Taipei. Snow, and they're hunkered down, they're cold. So maybe it was to draw on the sympathy of the Mongol ruler for this southern fisher. Unclear exactly what the interpretation would have been, but it was very much a sort of pro-Chinese and not so much seclusion, okay? Not the image of the fisherman as a secluded recluse who is refusing to serve and so forth, that kind of image, probably not so much to play here. So here, actually, this image is very similar, the detail here. Was it made at the imperial court, in keeping with this connoisseurship of ancient paintings? And hard to say. The other thing that when we look at the detail of the scene in the center, we have a family here, the little dog out there running out, and to greet, here's a porter bringing, it looks like there's some wine there and maybe some other things, and then a distinguished person under a parasol here, okay? So is this, say, a government official returning home? So maybe it was a gift to somebody who was going home after a period of serving in the government. Is it a rendition of Tao Yuan Ming's famous poem on homecoming? Quite possible that it was also that. So, as I said, I love these sort of, it could be many different things. But what I'm trying to do is paint this larger picture of different kinds of contexts in which art served certain purposes, and there was money or other kinds of favors changing hands. Okay, horse painting is often associated with the Mongols because Mongols loved horses. But anyone familiar with Chinese painting, and here I show you two we've already seen, also knows that horse painting had a history in China prior to the Mongols. And so I'm bringing you two horse paintings to contrast the ways in which horses could be used. in literati painting. Here, Zhao Mengfu, again, his horse and groom. There are two other paintings appended to this by his son and grandson, also of horse and groom. And there's an inscription here that dedicates it to it says, for the pure enjoyment of the surveillance commissioner Fei Qing. Scholars have been unable to identify who Fei Qing is, but he was a high-ranking member of the censorship bureau, okay? The guys who went out and made sure everybody was doing their job correctly and who reported back to the emperor if anything strange was going on. Zhao Mengfu is giving him this painting, or painting this for him, and we see a very good servant. Is it a portrait, a self-portrait of Zhao Mengfu himself, or is it a portrait of his of the man of Fei Qing? Perhaps. In any case, the symbolic language here is about a horse. Horses are faithful, good servants if you treat them well. Okay, and so here we see a good. A person who's treating this horse well or faithful. And Jonathan Hay at NYU has actually pointed out that Zhao Mengfu used a compass. If you trace these, they're perfect arcs. And so there's a vocabulary here of rectitude, of perfect circles. So that is in keeping with an idea of good government, okay? It's nice and round and perfect. On the other end of this, we have Gong Kai, who was a Song loyalist, refused to serve in government, and also was very naysaying about the Mongols in general. And here we have his wonderful noble horse. And one of the first things you'll notice is that this horse is not walking towards us, but is walking away from us. Remember the tribute bearers walking this direction? Well, here this horse is walking away from us. This is not a happy horse, okay? Starving and so forth. And it generally is seen as an emblem of the Song official who's been left behind, who now has no means of livelihood, no one to serve. He has no halter here, okay? He has, and so it's a kind of protest of his current situation. Probably painted for somebody of like mind, probably not meant to be sold, but rather political protest. So, but this sets up for this next image I want to show you, which has a very interesting patronage story behind it. This is by Ren Fa, the painting that's in the museum here of Renbo Wen that we saw, the two horses. That he is the grandfather of Renbo Wen. Okay, so Ren Fa is the grandfather of your artist. And here's a painting that he did of these two horses, okay? Not with grooms this time, but clearly they both had people that they served because they've both got halters on. One has a very nice one, and this one it's but you can clearly see this is based on that Gong Kai image. What is this about? Okay, Ren Fa was an engineer, a watersway engineer, and he worked in the government. He was not a high-ranking official, but somebody who was used more for his technical skills. But he was also a painter and was well-educated and painted sometimes for the emperor, in fact. And here is part of his inscription on this that gives us a way to understand it. He says in the beginning, "In my spare time away from official duties." What this means is, I painted this for myself, okay? This is outside of patronage considerations. It's on silk in color. Maybe he did just do it for his own pleasure, but so he may be posturing there. But he says, in any case, I depicted these two horses, fat and lean. The fat one displays a marvelous bone structure and wears a lead, a halter, and he stands tall and erect. And although sated with hay and grain, this is better than stumbling along a course without direction. The lean one's hide and hair are peeling away. He gnaws on coarse grass and stands in the frost and wind. And yet, although he seems to be ending his life as an outcast, he doesn't have the burden of galloping all day for his evening feed. We might feel sorry for him, but he doesn't have to sit around here and go to endless meetings and flatter these men who eat and drink and okay? Contrasts of circumstances are typified by this contrast of these two horses. Some of the scholar officials of this age are chaste and some are profligate, differing like the fat and lean horses. If one remains lean, yet fattens the whole nation, he will not be lacking in purity. But on the contrary, if one seeks to fatten only oneself and emaciate the masses, how will he not bequeath a shameful reputation for corruption? So if you judge a horse only by its external appearance, you really will come to feel ashamed. Therefore, I have inscribed the end of the scroll to await those who will understand. So he's playing on this, but the other interesting thing is we know that he painted for the emperor and he knew lots of people in high places. So it is quite possible that he was painting this for as a gift or even for some kind of favor from somebody, a surveillance commissioner who was in charge of making sure all the officials were doing the right thing, whatever it may be, and using the horse in that metaphorical way to make a new point, a different point that draws on both of those earlier Yuan traditions that were brought to bear in this scroll. Okay, so I said it was in 4 parts, and look at the time. I only have a little bit of time left for the 3 parts. You can tell I love painting. Hard to keep me away from painting. But the next one I want to talk about is new technologies, new markets, and tastes. And we're going to be looking at these underglazed porcelains. So 3 objects from the Asian Art Museum collection. On the left is a vase with floral scrolls. There's 2 of these in the museum. All of these were done in Jiangxi province, most of them at the kilns at Jingdezhen, which produced the finest porcelains. And in fact, in the early Yuan, they started using a different kind of makeup for the clay. So it was harder. It was, they were able to make thinner bodies, harder, beautiful white wares that were, everybody loved them across all of the Mongol Empire and beyond. So the mass production of these wares in the kilns in Jingdezhen and other southern places, but mainly Jingdezhen, was a major development of the Yuan period. And it was coupled with the importation of new materials. And so this one we see, it's a copper, on the left is a copper underglaze. So there was copper in China, but there were not ready supplies of cobalt oxide, which was used here for the underglaze on these 2 works. And in fact, those were, most of that was mined in the Middle East, the copper oxide, and brought almost 6,000 kilometers from the mines across the trading routes of Central Asia to southern China, where these wares were made. Many of the wares made were for export, just as they are today in Chinese manufacturing. And a lot of the shapes, designs, and so forth were based upon metalwork, Middle Eastern metalwork, and other kinds of objects that were in the possession of very wealthy Arab merchants, the very merchants who were bringing the cobalt oxide, would then commission wares that they felt would appeal to people in these distant realms. But some of the wares were also made for local consumption, but the vocabularies of those Middle Eastern wares were being imported. So these here, these are both based upon, not on Middle Eastern metalwares, but I think you all recognize them as coming out of the ritual vessels, the bronze ritual vessels. Here we have ding, and here we have a kind of handled jar, a hu, what we might call a hu, and some of these vocabularies. But this scroll work, for instance, very typical of the kinds of things that were being exported to the Middle East. And here, two more objects here, very Islamic kind of decorative character in this. Both of this is in Asia Society, and this is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This bottom register here, this is design motif, a stylized lotus that is imported from Tibetan visual imagery at this time. This kind of shape for the pattern up here comes out of the Jin tradition, the Jin and Liao, those dynasties in the north, while the southern Song was in the south. And then this comes straight out of Chinese textiles and other patterns. So we see this concatenation of these many different styles in the pattern here. At the same time, we see this concatenation of new materials, new technologies, and this mass market for these very luxurious wares. I talked briefly at the beginning about the cloth of gold, the nasish, that was so important for the Mongols, was a symbol of their power. They brought lots of textile workers from parts of Central Asia that they conquered and brought them to Dadu and other capitals and had them work there. And so we see these kind of things. Originally under Kublai Khan, you could only use this for lapels and collars, and so there were statutes. You couldn't overuse it, but eventually it became for court dress, banquets, which the Mongols love to have, would dress in this kind of robe. The other thing about this robe is it has a narrow waist and thin sleeves, which are very typical of Mongol dress, different from Chinese dress. Another kind of wear that was being produced at Jingdezhen is referred to as Shufoo Wear. Shufoo may have originally been produced during the Song, but became a wear that was, we believe, directly intended for the imperial household. I took this picture yesterday. This is the only one available on the database. This is on display upstairs on the 3rd floor. And unfortunately, this isn't in the database. But you see here, there's a, you can just, I took this with my iPhone. Floral vine here, and then a dragon in the center, so imperial. And then you can't, I think maybe the inscription is here, which are the two characters for Shufoo, which we think refers to the Ministry of Defense. These wares are rare. They're porcelain with a very heavy, creamy, bluish glaze. So it's not quite a transparent glaze, but it has a kind of unctuousness. It's a really, really beautiful piece. So that's upstairs. That would have been produced specifically for the use at the court. And we know that because of the Shufoo mark, which is in the decorative pattern, actually, not marked as like so many ceramic marks. They're on the bottom, right, with a brush. But here it's actually carved in the design, and so Shufoo wares are usually done in that manner. This one is on display. One of them is on display upstairs. These are wares, again, done in the South. They're referred to as Qingbai ware because they have this greenish glaze, greenish-bluish glaze on them. But you look at these next to a song work and you will immediately see that you've got a new group of patrons who have a very different taste. This one is more or less in the shape of a song mapping, very elegant shape. But go up there, I think it's on the 3rd floor, and look at these decorative motifs here. They're done with these teeny tiny, they're not a line, they're the teeny tiny bits of clay in a circle, come straight out of jewelry traditions. Any of you, so the little gold beading, there's a word for that, anybody know the word for that? Anyway, that's what this is. It comes straight out of that gold working tradition. And gold objects were so beloved by the Mongols. And even one scholar, Thomas Elson, equates the love of Mongol gold as by the Mongols as part of, it's bright, it's this sort of symbol of their glory and their greatness. The material itself has a certain warmth and brilliance and power that then is equated with Mongols, according to Thomas Elson. Okay, so the decorative motif, it's much gaudier, much more relates more to these new metalworking traditions. Here, this one, these kinds of extensions, this kind of carving, and the addition of this collar here, very typical of this more robust Yuan Dynasty taste than the sedate, under-spoke tradition of the Song. But they're made in the South, okay, in the former Song territories. For consumption, probably both North and South. I think by the end of the Song, by the end of the Yuan, you're starting to see these wares across the empire. So gradually this mix, of all of these different people and news visions are mixed into these hybrid wares that then become part of what we associate with the Yuan style. This probably done, again, for the court. There is another one in Beijing, a very large ware. This is, again, from your collection, 18 inches tall by 20 inches around. This is a large pot. This highly sculptural open work you would not have found in the Song, okay? And these bright colors, 3 color wares, there's a purple, yellow, and blue. These very gaudy peacocks amid clouds. This is, and here, dragons among clouds. This is this sort of robust, gaudy Yuan Dynasty, imperial taste in particular. So this is probably imperial ware or used in some kind of institution associated with imperial power, say a temple that was underwritten by the imperial family. Lacquers, again, in contrast, this one's on display upstairs, and this one I love because we have this theme of hunting. This is a theme that the Jin and Liao had, and here from that Kublai Khan hunting, that painting that we saw, there's a detail, and you can see that the falcon chasing, here's the swan, see, in the lotuses down here. And here you see the same thing without the lotuses, but that's an emblem of the hunt, and it becomes an emblem that you find throughout Yuan Dynasty wares. The other thing about Yuan Dynasty lacquers is that they're more sculpturally carved than earlier wares, more elegant, but also just less elegant, I should say. And the background tends to have, it's not just a plain ground, but you've got that filled in. And here, it's hard to see in this slide, but if you go look at this in the galleries, you'll see that there's a lot of articulation of these surfaces here. The wings, for instance, they're little small etching in so you can see every single feather, okay? So that kind of high quality workmanship that's detailed is part of this new taste, and we see it in the lacquers. And again, this deep carving here, this kind of sculptural treatment. Again, this one isn't on display. Okay, so I have a little bit of time to talk about the imperial love of Tibetan Buddhism and the way in which their patronage of the Tibetan Shakya sect worked its way into the rest of the visual arts. This is a sutra that's from the collection here. It's the frontispiece. It dates to 13... I think we've got an exact date on it. I probably have but we'll look at that in a moment. Okay, so this work is from Tibet, and it's on display in the Tibetan galleries, but it's from the period of Mongol rule in Tibet and in China. And this kind of sculpture actually can be found in from places in China, northern China. And then also at the central court, many temples. Here's one from contemporary Beijing based on the Tibetan style. Kublai Khan was a very, very strong believer in Tibetan Buddhism. And to become an adherent practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism during this period, you needed to give gifts to your teacher. Tibetan Buddhism is an esoteric faith, which means that the teachings are secret, are hidden, and you have to learn them through a master. And so your attachment to him, unlike Zen, where there was nothing that really, you didn't have to give gifts to become a Zen, to take on a Zen teacher. In esoteric Buddhism, particularly Tibetan Buddhism of this period, that exchange of money for teaching and of favors, rituals, and all the kinds of things that the good forces that the Buddha would bestow on you through the practice was very much a part of what Kublai and other royals had in mind in their support of this faith. Tibetans also played a major role at court as advisors. Phagspa, who is an important Tibetan cleric, actually designed the Mongolian Script based on Tibetan script. So prior to the mid-13th century, Mongolian didn't have a written form, and so it was at this time, under the leadership of these people, working with Tibetans, of Genghis Khan, working with Tibetans, that they developed a new script. So here I bring you another object from the collection, which I found on the database, but I was unable to find very much information about it. So it's kind of, I guess, I saw that new gallery downstairs where they're asking for input from people. Prototyping gallery. This could go there. I know there's at least one curator in this room. So, and maybe I just missed the scholarship on it. But in any case, you see here in Chinese, there's an inscription that tells us the date, 1298, and that it was made by imperial command. And it's an iron basin with silver inlay, and those of you familiar with Tibetan imagery, you immediately see that this is Tibetan Lama at the center of this piece. Around the exterior, these very fine images are, I think, the 16 Lohan, and there are one or two guardian figures there as well. Around the outside. And those of you familiar with Tibetan Buddhism know that the arhats, or the lohan, had an important role to play in the visual culture. Beautifully worked in silver, and beautiful work. There also, I don't think I have the image here in the slides, but at the bottom here, there is a Phagspa inscription, and I don't read Phagspa, so I can't tell you what it says. But in any case, And there's the central image on the interior. So my suspicion is that this was made at imperial command in the imperial workshops, which were many. They imported all these artists and had them working in these imperial workshops, and that this would have been made within that imperial workshop, probably for some kind of ritual in one of the imperial-sponsored temples. It's a fascinating piece. I'd love to know more about it. Okay, another piece that's gotten a lot of publicity recently is this mandala. Again, those of you familiar with Tibetan art will immediately recognize it. It's silk, it's large. Look at that, 96 inches tall, it's huge. Probably made for an initiation ceremony. And we have in the lower left, so here, portraits, 2 male and 2 female. And you will notice immediately the similarity to Chabi's headdress. These are empresses, okay? The wives of these 2 brothers over here. This one had was deceased, I think is why he has white on. But actually he was killed by his brother. Mongols were really fierce. So this guy is probably commissioned by this guy. And he has his brother as a kind of making up gesture. Is my guess. Maybe it was done before he died, and it shows the 4 of them together. But those 2 brothers never got along. So whoever commissioned it was making something up here. Or maybe neither of them, and it was somebody else hoping for reconciliation between them. I don't know. But in any case, here we have them, and you see, I mean, you see how fine this is, and their names are in tapestry. So really, really fine silk tapestries being created by these artisans brought from all over Central Asia, from Samarkand and all kinds of places to serve the imperial needs of in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And finally, this work, which is in the collection here, dated probably closer to the end here, 1322, rather than the beginning. This is a chapter of it's a Buddhist Sutra, and it was part of a Buddhist project of printing the Buddhist canon that began under the Song in the south, in Suzhou, Jiangsu province, in 1231, and the project continued. It was halted for a while during the war. There was a fire in 1258 in the monastery, which stopped. But in 1299, okay, well into the Mongol period, Yuan started in 1276. So 1299, the project was renewed, and they actually finished the whole. The carving of the blocks for the whole Tripitaka, all of the scriptures that they had at that time. And so here we see it's a wood block. This is the frontispiece. And you will immediately see aspects here that are not from the Song visual Buddhist tradition, but rather from the Tibetan Buddhist and Nepalese. The structure of the faces, the narrow waist, the clothing even. Many aspects here. This is the treatment of the mountains is somewhat closer to northern Song, but in any case, you see very clearly that even within this monastery in the south, these new visual vocabularies were being used in this long-term project that spanned both dynasties. This is a really interesting work in your collection, I think could provide a really interesting sort of cross-cultural study, along with the iron basin that I showed you a moment ago. Okay, a couple minutes. Popular entertainments and new pop icons. During the Jin Dynasty, and to a certain extent the Southern Song, there was a great sort of urban popular culture of plays and other kinds of spectacles. But in the Yuan, the reunification of the North and the South brought the two disparate traditions together. And there was a rise in the dramatic tradition during this period. Yuan drama. Yuan is famous for its dramas. And lots of dramas have been passed down. Literary texts have been passed down to us. But also in the visual vocabulary of this period, we see the growth of this popular culture, the dramatic tradition, and the use of these motifs in the art. So this one, which is on display right outside, over there? Okay, I'm lost. Anyway, it's on this floor. Longquan Wear, so it's from the south, and it's got the 8 Taoist Immortals. But I would caution you that this is probably not so much a religious piece as it is a part of this pop culture, which there were lots of plays about Taoist Immortals, and in fact, they have very dramatic poses and positions here. Their get-ups almost look like costumes. And then you also see the Yuan treatment, that highly sculptural treatment, the offsetting of these here, these panels, also typical of the Yuan Dynasty style, arising from this new sort of public dramatic tradition at this time. Another piece, here there are 3 images on this, but online I could only find this one of Zhang Taigong, or Zhang Shang, he's also known. And he was a minister who went out of, he was in reclusion, fishing with a hook that was straight, couldn't catch anything on it. But he became the advisor for the first Zhou dynasty king in way Shang Zhou period. And he became a kind of cultural icon. So here we see him. This is so elegantly done. It's just beautiful. Here you see that Tibetan style. It may be Yuan, but it's certainly coming out of this tradition. And we see on the other 2 are 2 other very famous recluses, people who didn't come out. But these were also subjects of famous plays during this period. So perhaps related to this new popular culture. And then this kind of battle scene, 3 Kingdoms, the legend of the 3 Kingdoms was a very, very popular topic in dramatic texts of this period. And playing out these military scenes. So this is, I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it comes out of a 3 Kingdoms period drama. I have a colleague who is actually working on trying to identify these scenes and seeing what play you might be able to connect them to. And I think that's the end.